This is a two-part series with our painting skies and clouds. And in this series, or in this particular painting, we're painting a herd of cows out in the pasture under the bright sunlight with clouds on the horizon. You see the drawing? I'm darkening some of the lines so they're a little clearer, but it's a low horizon, about a third up the page, with a couple stands of trees, one far away, one a little closer. A herd of cows, maybe looks like 9 or 10 cows in the midground there. And in terms of the drawing, not much more. I spent a fair amount of time getting the cows right. It's if you're going to do a creature or a person or a piece of architecture, often you need to spend extra time with the drawing, getting it so that it looks like the object you're representing. A cow is rather simple. The body is a rectangle, and the neck going down is usually a little longer, and the head is sort of boxy. Like anything, if you practice cows, they get easier with time. The clouds, I gave a little profile before I started painting. I'm going to be starting with a cobalt blue mixture in the sky, working on dry paper. This allows me to achieve the edge of the cumulus cloud, which is rounded, it's puffy. That's the characteristic that we're trying to establish with this application of blue. We start at the top and we work down to the edges of the cloud with the same cobalt blue. As we get a little lower in the sky, I add a little bit of water so that there's a noticeable gradation from the top to where I end the white. And all the way I'm creating these rounded edges that are typical of cumulus clouds. And if I can get those two features right, the edges and the small gradient or slight gradient that occurs, it will count for a lot in the painting. Everything is pretty hard edged in this style, in this particular method. We're working on dry paper. We're using a pretty full brush. And as I come lower in the clouds, I'm painting more sky, but you notice it's quite a bit lighter. The tonality is quite a bit lighter. This helps to create a roundness to the sky. Even though the sky is perceived behind the clouds, we would still want to give it some shape. So as I get lower, I'm creating the pattern of the clouds. This is looking at a photograph or a representation, but actually I'm looking more at my painting, trying to emulate the pattern that I recognized. So as the clouds move towards the far horizon, they're getting smaller, thinner. The amount of white is much less. The clouds in the foreground, a lot of white, rolling big tops, and bright contrast against the sky. What I'm doing now is just taking a wet brush and softening some edges. Now applying a little bit of gray to the undersides of the distant clouds. Very light mixture of burnt sienna and cobalt blue. And then as I work into the bigger clouds, I'm trying to create a sense of the inner forms. There's usually some clouds within clouds or shapes within shapes, and that's what I'm trying to do with this gray. Give the underside of the cloud a little more of a shaded effect. So the gray helps to do this. It's basically a close value to the blue we've been using. So as it dries, they'll assimilate more and more. You can see sort of the structure emerging in the cloud itself. This technique is a little easier in terms of the technical demand. It's a little harder in terms of the vision, in terms of seeing a pattern and creating that pattern with brush strokes. The sky is pretty much done. It's going to dry and it's going to smooth out. While it's drying, I'm painting the greenery for the pasture or the open space. It's a mixture of cadmium yellow and the blue that I had on my palette, which was cobalt blue, and a little bit of burnt sienna to gray it, make it not so potent, especially towards the back. I'm going to be adding stronger colors, more yellow, more some red and some deeper green as I come forward, but in the background I want it to recede, so it's got a little more water and it's a little grayer in the back. You notice I'm cutting around the shapes of the cows, and I'm not cutting around the whole shape. I'm cutting around that rectangle that I mentioned before, because if I was trying to cut around legs and ears and noses, it would be very painstaking and very hard to do, and there's no reason for it. We can accomplish what we need if we isolate the body, the big body of the cow, the big rectangle. That will be enough. We can, since we're painting Holsteins that have the black pattern, having a little bit of white is important, but a lot of what we do is going to be with that darker color. You see here I'm adding more darks to the foreground. Here comes some of that burnt sienna and red, which I mentioned, applied while the paint is still wet, so that I get cauliflowers and streaks, which normally we would avoid when we're painting, but in this case it gives us a representation of grass or flowers, or gives a thickness to this front area. And I'm not hesitant to throw little bits of water or colors that you might not expect into this foreground. I think it helps to create a feeling that we're looking at a pasture, and it's not just green that we see. We see varieties of green, and we see other colors floating in there. That helps to make the foreground more lively.